My name's Jamie Heywood and I run Uber's Northern and Eastern European rides business. At Uber, we're absolutely committed to electrifying our fleet. Uber drivers, like other professional drivers, drive significantly more than the average driver. On average across Europe, it's about 4 times more. And what that means is that presents an opportunity. The opportunity is, firstly, that obviously if we can move our drivers into battery electric vehicles, it matters more in terms of the quality of the air because they drive more. But secondly, it's an opportunity because actually we think professional drivers will be the early mass adopters of electric vehicles, because it's for professional drivers that the total cost of ownership, the break-even point where paying slightly higher upfront is compensated for by lower running costs, makes sense. When you drive more, the value of the lower running costs is obviously more. So that's why we've made a number of commitments to electrify our fleet. In London, we've made a commitment to be 100% electric by 2025, and I'll talk later about some of the reasons why London is leading the way. But across 7 cities in Europe, we've committed by 2025 to be 50% electric. That means 50% of all kilometers driven will be in battery electric vehicles in those cities. And we've also committed to be 100% of kilometers driven in battery electric vehicles in any cities where the policy frameworks are in place to encourage a just transition to electric vehicles for drivers. Lastly, we've committed to be fully transparent with respect to our CO2 footprint. So we'll be publishing data that makes clear the CO2 per kilometer driven for rides on the platform in Europe. Now, when I look at these commitments, these are bold and aggressive commitments. And whilst I feel optimistic that we can get there, the area that currently causes me the greatest concern and causes our drivers the greatest concern is EV charging infrastructure and the lack of it. And it matters particularly to professional drivers like those on Uber, because many of them don't have off-street parking. So they can't solve the problem of charging their vehicle by installing a home charger. In the UK, in London, 85% of drivers don't have access to off-street parking. And that means that they're extremely dependent on public charging to be able to make the transition. And for our drivers, it's doubly critical because any time spent looking for a charger during the day is time that they could have spent earning. So really, for our drivers, the optimal solution, both for our drivers and actually for the city and the grid, is to do overnight charging. And when we look at many cities, probably with the exception of Amsterdam, there's just not enough overnight charging near where drivers live. And I think Amsterdam is particularly notable because they've really led that through their policy of having a right to charge, where anyone in the city who wants to move into an electric vehicle can ask the government for a charger to be installed near their home. And we would love to see, and we really encourage cities to make similar moves like that. We're absolutely committed to partnering with cities to solve this problem, but it requires being very joined up, both in the actions that we can take, and I'll talk about a few of those, and make sure they're fully aligned with policies that the cities put in place to really drive electrification. So if I take some examples, in London in 2018, the mayor implemented the congestion charge zone in central London, but exempted electric vehicles. And that provided a strong incentive for our drivers to move into electric vehicles. So we've supported them by implementing a clean air charge, where riders traveling through central London will pay an extra 15p per kilometre. And that money goes into a driver savings account. So the individual driver will get that money. to be redeemed against their first upgrade to a battery electric vehicle. And what that means is we've raised over £120 million to support drivers in that transition. In addition, in London, we saw that whilst there was good charging in the centre of London, there was not good charging near where our drivers need it. So we've lent in and we've made a commitment to invest £5 million to help drivers install chargers near where they live. And we're working closely with local councils to make sure that happens. Now, these are just some of the tools that we have and some of the things we're willing to do as and when the policy environment is right, working in conjunction with government to make sure we deliver on our commitments to be fully electric in London by 2025 and across Europe by 2030. The move to battery electric vehicles is a bit of a chicken and an egg problem. So there's two problems why professional drivers like ours, indeed any driver, doesn't make the move to battery electric vehicles. The first one is the higher upfront cost. And the second one is range anxiety, the worry that you won't be able to charge the vehicle as and when you need it. And the irony is both of these problems can be fixed by selling more EVs. So as you sell more EVs, the upfront price will come down because you can amortize the high upfront costs over more vehicles. And also by selling more EVs, you create the incentives for infrastructure providers to start building more infrastructure. So therefore, it's absolutely critical when cities think about how they overcome this chicken and an egg problem to really be clear where the early mass adopters of electric vehicles are going to be, because that's how you start the flywheel of electrification. It's not going to happen everywhere all at once. It's going to happen in small pockets from which you can get the momentum to then roll it out. And my belief, and I think belief of many, is that professional drivers who drive a lot, are the early mass adopters of electric vehicles. And therefore, when I look at the benefits that cities will get and that we will get from the adoption of electric vehicles in our fleet, they're really threefold. Firstly, it's cleaner air for cities. Secondly, it's lower running costs for drivers. So once they're in the electric vehicle, actually, there's lower running costs, which means more of the money that they earn goes to them. And thirdly, it helps cities overcome the chicken and the egg problem because the early mass adopters, by growing electric vehicle penetration in the group of early mass adopters, that's how you get the flywheel going to roll out electrification to all vehicles in the city. EV charging utilization is absolutely critical, because when we talk to people who are installing or want to install chargers, the key thing is how often are they going to be used, because how often they are used is really the biggest driver of the returns that the investors can get in the assets that they've put into the ground. So we're working with a number of providers like BP, but also like local councils in many cities across Europe, to try and make sure that the utilization of those chargers is as good as it possibly can be. And critical to that is putting the chargers in the right place where they're needed. So in many cities, actually, chargers are located in central areas, which ironically is not where people live. So whilst you need rapid chargers in central areas, what you need is slow chargers close to people's homes, particularly when they don't have off-street parking. So we have a lot of data that we share with private companies and also with governments about where drivers live, how they drive. And what that allows us to do is that allows us to be very, very clear on the best points to put charging infrastructure today. So we've worked with BP and we're working with them to roll out chargers in zones in outer London. And we also work with cities like Amsterdam, where the way they've overcome the problem of putting chargers where they're needed is ironically to ask citizens. So they have a right to charge, which means that any citizen living in Amsterdam can request a charger near their home. So you know once the request has come that the demand is going to be there. And what Amsterdam also does, which is particularly good, is they have very transparent data about utilization, which any third party can get. So therefore, it becomes very easy for others who want to build infrastructure to see what the utilization is in different parts of the city, where there's underutilization, and most importantly, where there's overutilization, because that's obviously the best place to build new chargers. When I talk to our drivers, one of the biggest issues they face today is the hugely disparate range of companies, usually private companies, providing EV infrastructure, which means that your card that works on one may not work on another, and you therefore have to keep a bank of EV charging cards in your wallet. Now, we don't think that works for anyone, and we therefore strongly encourage governments and cities to really ensure interoperability between all charging infrastructure.